I have been playing a lot of Monster Hunter lately. Like, a lot. Look, unemployment hits different. Something I find fun to talk about is, in a game with 14 distinct weapon fighting styles, which one is your favorite weapon? If you're going to ask me that, I think that's actually a question with an interesting answer. So, Monster Hunter World was my first Monster Hunter, and going into that with fresh eyes and an open mind, I bounced around for a while between stuff like Switch Axe and Hammer, trying to find something that was right for me. Surprising probably nobody who knows me, I eventually gravitated towards the heavy bowgun and sunk hours and hours of gameplay into it, ending up with it as my most played weapon in the game. With my little experimentation and learning phase out of the way, when it came time to finally play a new Monster Hunter Rise, it must have been very easy for me to just pick up the weapon I already knew I loved from the get-go and start shooting dragons in the face. So let's go ahead and tab over to my guild card to take... Right, so I have issues with the latest incarnation of the heavy bowgun. But how can I know I don't like it if I never took it into a hunt? That's what that 0 means, I never actually used it outside of the training mode. Well, it's pretty easy actually. My problems with it aren't balance related. I know it's just as strong as it ever was if I was willing to put in the time to play it. To me, it's all about the weapon fantasy, the game feel, something you can tell instantly upon engaging in the player input and the feedback the game provides, and how that changed between World and Rise. When interacting with the weapon, naturally the player needs to input something on the controller. Imagine, if you will, the trigger of a gun. You pull the trigger and the bullet is fired. This is how it worked in World, and that seems like it should be a pretty obvious analog here. But this isn't how it works in Rise. Rise introduced a new mechanic where you can charge your shots, or crouch to enter a rapid fire mode. Either way, these mechanics are initiated with the player holding down the trigger. But if you don't want to use that ability and just want to do a quick single shot, the bullet still isn't fired until you release the trigger and the game recognizes you're not interested in engaging in either of those new mechanics. This is the kind of input I would expect more from something like the bow, where your character has to physically pull back the string and then release it. A gun is something where I expect the projectile to come out as I pull the trigger. It no longer feels like a gun, and it just makes the heavy bowgun feel less responsive as a result. Unfortunately, player input is only half the process. Once I've pulled the trigger, it's on the game to take care of the rest, and my issues continue. A large part of the weapon fantasy to me with the heavy bowgun is, well, it's just that. It's heavy. It's a huge piece of mechanical trash, an uncontrollable beast that you're fighting with in the name of absolute maximum raw firepower. This is conveyed really well in World with limited player movement and how committed many of your actions are. So what's it like when I fire a bullet in Rise? I mean, it seems fine at first glance, but to me it's just empty. But what's it missing? The most immediately noticeable thing to me is the lack of screen shake on nearly anything you do. In World, almost every bullet you fire, every reload you perform, the screen shakes just a little bit. Not enough to be obnoxious, but enough to notice it. The weapon also generally has less muzzle flash compared to World, and there's no controller rumble when firing bullets. I know these sound very nitpicky, but it's things like those that give the weapon tangible weight and power, which is important in media where you can't exactly reach in and feel how heavy the weapon is with your own hands. On top of this, Rise also adds a new faster reload speed while entirely removing one of the slower ones. They allow the player to sidestep when they couldn't before, and the game also completely restructures the weapon's deviation system, a system where in World it meant more powerful guns bounce the aiming reticle around, but in Rise it just means your bullets travel in random directions, but otherwise your character has perfect aim. All of this adds up to the point where it doesn't feel like I'm trying to wrestle the weapon anymore to achieve that maximum firepower. It's become a completely frictionless and weightless experience. Game feel is so important. I've stuck with a lot of questionable games just because they felt amazing to play, and game feel is the reason I fell in love with the heavy bowgun in the first place. But now it's missing that oomph, that power. and that's enough to bring my most played weapon in the game down to something I never want to touch. Because why play something if it doesn't feel good? It's unfortunate to me that Ryze's heavy bowgun took such a step backwards like this, when other weapons like the switch axe still feel great to use. I suppose the most damning thing I could say about it overall is it feels like I'm using a gun that came out of Mass Effect 1, which is a far cry from how powerful the weapon used to make me feel. I still enjoy Ryze a lot. I'm working through Sunbreak as we speak. I've just moved on to other weapons. It's a bit sad, but I am left with a little hope. I understand the Monster Hunter franchise is actually split across 2 development teams, so hopefully, with the next project being helmed by the team that made World, they'll be able to recapture that magic the next time around. Also, to be clear, the entire reason I made this video was just to show you my stats and play the fart.